The Xiphorian dreadnought hung in orbit over Earth like a silent executioner, its sleek black hull reflecting the distant glow of the sun. The ship was a fortress, bristling with plasma cannons and energy shields powerful enough to withstand an entire human fleet. Inside, the bridge hummed with controlled efficiency. Xiphorian officers, tall and clad in metallic armor, moved with the confidence of an empire that had never lost a war. Commander Lady Valeth stood at the center, arms crossed, her golden eyes scanning the holographic display in front of her. Earth's defenses had crumbled. Their satellites were offline. Their military bases lay in ruins. It was only a matter of time before complete surrender. A junior officer approached, his blue skin pale. "My lady, the final wave of ground forces is ready. Shall we proceed with orbital bombardment?" Valeth smirked. Humans are resilient, but even they have limits. Wipe out their remaining strongholds. The officer nodded, but before he could relay the command, alarms blared across the bridge. The holographic display flickered, showing a red warning symbol. Valeth frowned. "Report." An ensign's fingers flew over the control panel, his voice trembling. "We've detected an anomaly. A breach in our perimeter." Valeth raised an eyebrow. "A human fleet?" "No, my lady." The ensign hesitated, his eyes darting across the screen. "It's one ship." Silence filled the bridge. Valeth's expression darkened. "One ship." The officer swallowed hard. "Yes, my lady. A single human dropship. It somehow bypassed our sensor grid." Another officer, his voice thick with disbelief, whispered, "It's her." Valeth turned sharply. "Who?" The officer's hands clenched at his sides. "The human." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Commander Area Vale." For the first time in her career, Lady Valeth felt a sliver of unease. She had heard the stories. Every Xiphorian had. A lone human soldier who had torn through entire battalions. A ghost who left nothing but destruction in her wake. Soldiers spoke of her in hushed voices, calling her a demon, a shadow, a nightmare in human form. But myths were for the weak. Valeth refused to believe in ghosts. "Fools," she spat, snapping out of her thoughts. "It's one human. Deploy the security teams. I want her dead." Deep inside the dreadnought, in the dimly lit maintenance corridors, Area Vale moved like a phantom. Her black combat suit blended with the shadows, her boots silent against the metal floor. A high-tech cloaking device flickered over her, rendering her invisible to Xiphorian scanners. Her HUD displayed a countdown. 23 minutes until orbital bombardment. She exhaled, steady and controlled. No mistakes. 2 Xiphorian guards patrolled the hallway ahead. Their rifles gleamed under the cold lights. Area didn't hesitate. She moved fast, too fast for them to react. A flash of silver as she plunged her combat knife into the first guard's neck. Before the second could even scream, she fired a suppressed shot straight into his skull. The bodies hit the floor soundlessly. Blood pooled beneath them. Area wiped her blade clean and continued forward. Up ahead, the hallway split into multiple directions. She tapped a button on her wrist, and a holographic map projected in front of her. Her target, the ship's main reactor. Take it out, and the dreadnought would be crippled. A voice crackled in her earpiece. "Area, you're on borrowed time. They know you're here." It was Rook, her AI companion, embedded in her neural interface. His voice was cool, calm, a steady presence in her mind. Area smirked. "Let them come." A sharp hiss echoed through the corridor. Heavy footsteps. Then, Xiphorian battle droids marched around the corner, sleek and deadly, their glowing visors scanning for threats. Area flicked her wrist. A small disc-shaped EMP grenade slid from her gauntlet into her palm. She rolled it across the floor. Boom. Electricity crackled, the droids seizing up as their systems fried. In a blur, Area dashed forward, sliding beneath one of them, and jamming a pulse blade into its core. Sparks erupted as it collapsed. More Xiphorian soldiers arrived, their rifles blazing. Arya ducked into cover, her mind racing. She needed to move fast. She activated her cloaking device and sprinted down the hall, bullets whizzing past. The moment she reached a junction, she dropped into a maintenance shaft, narrowly avoiding a plasma blast. "Where is she?" a soldier shouted behind her. Arya allowed herself a small smile. They were afraid. Good. The security alert spread through the ship like wildfire. Valeth's fury burned hotter than a solar flare. "She's making fools of us. Seal every exit. Lock down the reactor." "My lady," an officer stammered, "our forces are in disarray. She's moving too fast." Valeth's fingers curled into a fist. "Then slow her down." In the lower levels, Arya reached the engineering bay, a vast room filled with energy conduits and massive cooling tanks. A squad of Zaforian commandos stood between her and the control panel. Arya exhaled. Time to finish this. She hurled a smoke grenade, shrouding the room in thick, dark fog. The Zaforians switched to infrared, but it was useless. Arya was already behind them. Gunfire erupted. Bodies dropped. The last soldier spun around, terror in his eyes. Arya grabbed his wrist, twisted his weapon away, and slammed him into the console. His own plasma rifle discharged, straight into his chest. Silence. Arya's heart pounded. She stepped over the bodies, reached the control panel, and inserted a data spike. Rook's voice buzzed in her ear, overriding reactor controls. "Stand by." Her countdown flashed. 12 minutes until bombardment. Then, a new voice echoed from behind her. "Turn around, human." Arya froze. The air crackled with tension. Slowly, she turned. Lady Valeth stood at the entrance, flanked by 2 elite guards. Unlike the others, she wasn't afraid. Her golden eyes gleamed with cold amusement. "So," Valeth mused, tilting her head, "this is the infamous Arya Vale, the great human warrior." She took a step closer. "You don't look like a monster." Arya smirked. "And you don't look like a winner." Valeth's eyes flashed with rage. "You have no idea what you've just started." Arya flexed her fingers around her weapon. "Neither do you." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, the real fight began. The Zaforian Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds. Their rule was absolute, their power unmatched. They were an empire of precision and control, their fleets spreading across the stars like a plague. Every species they encountered had fallen. Some surrendered willingly, others resisted. It never made a difference. The Zaforians were always stronger, always more advanced, always victorious. Humans were supposed to be no different. When the Zaforians first arrived in Earth's solar system, they didn't see a threat. They saw another weak, primitive race clinging to an insignificant planet. Their scouts reported the human technology was outdated, their ships slow, their weapons primitive compared to Zaforian energy-based warfare. They had no intergalactic fleets, no planetary shields, no genetic enhancements to make them superior warriors. On paper, Earth was an easy conquest. But paper doesn't bleed. At first, the war followed the usual Zaforian pattern. They wiped out Earth's satellites, disabling global communication within hours. Their ships blackened the skies, bombarding key military bases, leaving craters where once stood the strongest defenses of humanity. Within days, they controlled space. Within weeks, they had crushed half the planet's armies. And yet, something was different. Unlike other species, humans didn't surrender. Even when faced with overwhelming firepower, they fought back. They adapted, learning how to counter Zaforian tactics faster than any race before. They used guerrilla warfare, striking at supply lines, hacking enemy communications, and using their own ships as battering rams against Zaforian cruisers. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. The Zaforians did not understand. They had conquered countless species, but never had they faced an enemy like humanity. Their soldiers should have been terrified, broken, and begging for mercy. Instead, they fought harder with every battle. They fought like demons, like creatures with nothing left to lose. The Xiphorians had superior weapons, superior numbers, superior technology. But none of it seemed to matter. Every time they crushed one resistance cell, another rose in its place. Every time they declared victory, humans proved them wrong. And then there was her. Commander Area Vale was a name the Xiphorians had come to fear. At first, she had been just another soldier, another human resistance fighter. But she had proven to be something else entirely. A force of nature. A living nightmare. Every battle she fought left the Xiphorians reeling. She was no ordinary warrior. She was the reason the Empire's forces hesitated before entering battle. They called her the Shadow of Earth. Area was there when the Battle of Luna Base turned from a massacre into humanity's first victory. She was there when the Xiphorians lost their first dreadnought in orbit, watching as it crashed into the Pacific Ocean, burning like a falling star. She was there when the invaders thought they had finally secured the last human stronghold, only to be met with an ambush so devastating that even Xiphorian High Command was forced to acknowledge the truth. Humans were not weak. Humans would never stop fighting. Now, the war had reached its final stage. The Xiphorians, furious at their prolonged struggle, had decided to end it with one swift strike. Their flagship, the Xiphorian dreadnought, was positioned above Earth, preparing for a full-scale planetary bombardment. If the attack succeeded, the war would be over. Humanity would be wiped from existence. But humanity had one last move to play. The Resistance knew they couldn't win a direct battle against the dreadnought. It was too powerful, too well defended. So they did what humans did best. They adapted. The mission was simple but impossible. Infiltrate the enemy flagship, sabotage its reactor, and cripple the Xiphorian fleet from within. There was only one person who could do it. Area Vale. She wasn't chosen because she was the strongest or the fastest. She wasn't chosen because she had the best weapons or the most experience. She was chosen because she had something no Xiphorian soldier could ever understand. She refused to lose. Unlike the Xiphorians, who had been bred for war, who fought because it was in their nature, Area fought because she had something to protect. She had lost her family in the first wave of the invasion. She had watched her world burn. She had seen friends die, entire cities erased from existence. But instead of breaking her, it had forged her into something else, something unstoppable. The Resistance gave her the best tech they had: experimental cloaking devices, EMP grenades, railguns powerful enough to punch through Xiphorian armor. They outfitted her ship with stealth plating, designed to slip past enemy defenses undetected. But in the end, Area knew none of it would guarantee her survival. The Xiphorians were ruthless. Their ship was a fortress. If they caught her, there would be no escape. She went anyway, because humans never stopped fighting. And tonight, the Empire would learn that the hard way. Area's breath was steady as she moved through the cold, metallic corridors of the Xiphorian dreadnought. The ship was massive, its hallways stretching endlessly in all directions, dimly lit by the eerie blue glow of alien technology. Every step she took was measured, every shadow a potential ambush. She knew they were coming. The Xiphorians had already sounded the alarm. She pressed her back against a wall, listening. Heavy footsteps echoed from around the corner. A squad, heavily armed. Their movements were precise, disciplined. Xiphorian elite guards. These weren't the standard soldiers she had cut through in the lower levels. These were killers. Area closed her eyes, counting their steps. 5, 6, 7 of them. Her fingers curled around the hilt of her pulse blade. The weapon hummed softly, a blade of concentrated energy flickering to life in her grip. She waited, heartbeat steady, muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. The first soldier turned the corner. In one swift motion, she lunged forward, driving the blade through his chest. His eyes widened in shock, but before he could even cry out, she twisted the weapon and yanked it free. Blood sprayed across the walls. The other 6 reacted instantly. Shouts in their guttural alien language filled the corridor. Plasma rifles were raised, glowing barrels aimed directly at her, but Aria was already in motion. She rolled forward as the first shots fired, the air crackling with heat as plasma bolts sizzled past her. She sprang up from the ground, driving her boot into the chest of the closest soldier, sending him crashing backward into another. 2 more aimed their weapons, too slow. Aria flicked her wrist, and an EMP grenade shot from her gauntlet, landing between them. The explosion sent out a pulse of blue energy, short-circuiting their suits and weapons. They twitched violently before collapsing, their armor useless, their bodies spasming as the electricity overloaded their nervous systems. 3 left. 1 came at her with a blade of his own, a curved, glowing weapon humming with deadly energy. He was fast, but Aria was faster. She ducked under his strike, twisted behind him, and plunged her pulse blade into the base of his skull. The other 2 fired wildly, panicked. She used the dying soldier as a shield, then shoved his body toward them before finishing them off with 2 clean shots from her silenced pistol. Silence. 7 elite guards, gone in seconds. Aria exhaled slowly, stepping over the bodies. They had underestimated her. They always did. But she knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was still ahead. She moved deeper into the ship, keeping low, her cloaking device flickering as she activated it again. The corridor led to a massive chamber, an armory filled with weapons, ammunition, and armor. Dozens of Zodphorian soldiers were gearing up, preparing for battle. They knew she was here. They were waiting. A normal soldier would retreat, call for backup, find another route. Aria did none of those things. She stepped forward into the light. The Zodphorian soldiers froze. For a moment, there was only silence. Then realization dawned on them. It was her. She saw the fear in their eyes. "She's here," one of them shouted in their native tongue. Chaos erupted. Aria moved like a storm. She threw a flash grenade into the center of the room, blinding them. Before they could react, she was among them. Her pulse blade carved through the first soldier's armor, cutting through flesh and bone like paper. She grabbed his rifle before his body hit the floor and turned it on the others, firing in quick, controlled bursts. The room exploded with gunfire. Plasma bolts scorched the walls, leaving blackened marks as they missed their target. Aria was a blur, weaving between them, every shot she fired hitting its mark. A soldier lunged at her from the side. She ducked, spun, and drove her blade into his stomach before kicking him away. Another came at her, swinging a massive energy hammer. She dodged just in time, the weapon smashing into the floor with enough force to leave a crater. Aria used the opening to slide beneath him, planting a charge on his back before rolling away. She pressed the detonator. The explosion sent him flying, his armor shattering, his body slamming into the far wall. The remaining soldiers hesitated. Aria stood among their fallen comrades. Blood splattered across her suit, her pulse blade still humming with energy. She raised her pistol and aimed at the nearest soldier. Run. They did. Zodphorian warriors, trained from birth, armed with the most advanced technology in the galaxy, ran from a single human. Aria wasted no time. She grabbed extra ammunition, weapons, and explosives from the armory before moving on. She had a mission to complete. As she stepped into the next corridor, Rook's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Aria, you've stirred the nest. They're bringing in the Enforcers." Her jaw tightened. The Enforcers were the deadliest warriors in the Zodphorian Empire. Enhanced, modified, perfect killers. She had fought one before. It nearly killed her. This time, she would be facing an entire squad. A door ahead hissed open. 5 figures stepped through. Tall, armored, their black exosuits humming with advanced shielding technology. Their helmets were smooth, featureless, making them look more like machines than living beings. They carried weapons designed to kill anything that stood in their way. Arya took a deep breath. No fear, no hesitation. One of them spoke, his voice distorted through his helmet. "You should not have come here, human." Arya smirked. "You first." The enforcers attacked. They moved impossibly fast, their strikes precise, calculated. Arya barely dodged the first energy blade that slashed toward her face. She countered, but her attack glanced off the enforcers' armor. Their shields were active. She had seconds to adjust. She ducked as another attack came, rolling backward and firing her pistol. The shots were absorbed by their shields. Bullets wouldn't work. She switched tactics. She sprinted toward one, feinting left before twisting right. At the last second, she activated an overloaded EMP charge and slammed it against his chest. The shield flickered. Arya didn't hesitate. She jammed her pulse blade straight through his visor. 1 down, 4 to go. The others adjusted, moving with even greater speed. Arya dodged, barely escaping a blade aimed at her spine. A gauntleted fist caught her in the ribs, sending her crashing into a wall. Pain exploded through her body. She rolled to her feet, breathing hard. She had to be smarter. She activated her last cloaking charge, vanishing from sight. The enforcers froze, scanning for her. They relied on their sensors. She moved fast, silent, slipped behind one, deactivated the cloaking for a single second, just enough to drive a knife through his throat. 2 down. The last 3 turned, adapting. Arya threw a shock grenade, stunning them for a brief moment. Enough time for her to grab an enforcer's own energy rifle, aim it, and pull the trigger. A searing blue beam tore through 2 of them. 1 left. The final enforcer charge, rage fueling his attacks. But he was alone now. Arya sidestepped, dodging his blade, twisting behind him before plunging her own into the weak point of his armor. Silence. 5 enforcers, dead. Arya exhaled, her hands covered in their black blood. She reloaded her pistol and kept moving. The reactor was close. The final battle was coming. And Arya Vale was ready. Arya moved through the dark corridors of the Zydforian dreadnought, her breath slow, controlled, but the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. Every step she took left behind a trail of blood. Some of it hers, most of it not. The bodies of the enforcers lay scattered behind her, but she didn't stop to look. There was no time to process the fight, no time to think about the pain radiating from her ribs, the burning in her muscles. The mission wasn't over. The reactor chamber was close now. Just ahead, behind those reinforced doors, lay the heart of the enemy flagship. If she could destroy it, the entire Zydforian fleet would be crippled, and Earth would finally have a fighting chance. But as she reached the entrance, her earpiece crackled to life. "Arya, I don't have much time." Rook's voice, weak, strained. Arya's heart stopped. "Rook," she whispered. She pressed a hand to her earpiece, trying to steady her voice. "Listen to me," he coughed. "I'm not getting out of here. You need to finish this." Arya shook her head. No. She had known Rook for years. He was more than just a soldier, more than a comrade. He was her closest friend, the one who had pulled her out of the rubble after the first Zydforian attack, the one who had fought beside her in every battle, who had laughed with her between missions when the world felt like it was falling apart. "Tell me where you are." She started moving, eyes scanning the corridors. "I'll come get you." "You can't," Rook said. His voice was softer now. Arya's pulse pounded in her ears. "Don't you dare say that. Just tell me where." "It's too late," he interrupted. "Zydforians hit the control deck. I held them off, but—" He let out a ragged breath. "I'm bleeding out, Arya." Arya swallowed, forcing back the lump in her throat. "I can still make it." "No." Rook's voice was firm. "You have to finish this. Don't let this be for nothing." She clenched her jaw. Her hands trembled. She had lost too many people, too many names, too many faces, all taken by this war. And now, Rook, you listen to me, she whispered. You hold on. I'll. Area. She stopped. You know what to do. Silence stretched between them. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath. I'll make them pay, she promised. There was a small, broken chuckle on the other end. I know you will. And then, static. Rook was gone. Area stood there for a moment, the world around her blurring. The pain in her body faded beneath the crushing weight in her chest. But she didn't let herself break. Not yet. She opened her eyes. There was only one thing left to do. She turned toward the reactor doors. The grief, the anger, the exhaustion. It all burned away, leaving only cold, unwavering determination. She would finish this. For Rook. For everyone. She placed an explosive charge on the door's locking mechanism. A short beep, then a flash. Boom. The reinforced steel buckled under the blast. Area kicked the remains aside and stepped through. Inside, the reactor pulsed with raw energy, a massive sphere suspended in the center of the chamber, surrounded by conduits and power relays. The core of the Xiphorian dreadnought. The moment she entered, alarms blared. Automated turrets dropped from the ceiling, tracking her movements. Security drones swarmed in. Area didn't hesitate. She moved fast, weaving between cover, dodging streams of plasma fire. She raised her stolen Xiphorian rifle and fired, tearing through the drones with pinpoint precision. One by one, they fell. A turret locked onto her. She rolled beneath its fire and launched a grenade. The explosion sent it crashing to the floor in a shower of sparks. She sprinted toward the reactor's control panel, fingers flying across the alien interface. She had studied their systems, memorized their controls. She bypassed the security protocols and initiated the overload sequence. A deep hum filled the chamber. The reactor shook. Warning lights flashed. 10 minutes until detonation. Area turned to leave. And stopped. A figure stood in her path, taller than any Xiphorian she had fought before. He wore obsidian black armor, his form monstrous, his red eyes glowing beneath his helmet. A Xiphorian warlord. Area gritted her teeth. Of course they had a failsafe. The warlord stepped forward, his voice a deep guttural growl. You think you have won. Area raised her blade. I think you're about to find out. The warlord charged. Their blades clashed, sending a shockwave through the chamber. Area twisted, dodging his massive strikes. But he was fast, faster than anything she had faced. She barely avoided a killing blow, the energy blade slicing past her shoulder, leaving a burning gash. She retaliated, ducking low and slashing at his side, but his armor absorbed the impact. He kicked her hard, sending her crashing into a console. Pain flared through her ribs, but she pushed through it. She couldn't lose. Not now. The reactor countdown ticked away. 7 minutes. The warlord came again. This time, she was ready. She let him strike, dodging at the last second, then slammed an EMP charge against his chest. It detonated, his armor flickering. A weakness. Area lunged. Her blade found its mark, piercing through the weak point in his armor. She drove it deep, twisting. The warlord let out a choking snarl, then fell. She yanked the blade free, breathing hard. The ship trembled. The overload was reaching critical. 4 minutes. She turned and ran. Every step felt heavier, her body screaming in protest. But she didn't stop. She reached the hangar, found a Xiphorian fighter, and climbed in. Her hands flew over the controls. The ship roared to life, the launch bay opening into the vastness of space. As she blasted out, the Xiphorian fleet loomed ahead, unaware of what was about to happen. Then, the dreadnought exploded. A blinding light consumed the sky as fire and debris erupted outward. The shockwave rippled through the battlefield, shaking the enemy fleet. Ships veered off course, their formations breaking apart. Humanity's greatest enemy, The invincible Xiphorian flagship was gone. Aria's hands trembled on the controls. She watched the wreckage burn, a heavy silence settling over her. Rook should have been here. He should have seen this victory. But he was gone. And he wasn't the only one. So many had been lost. So many names, faces, voices that would never return. Aria closed her eyes. She had won. But at what cost? The war wasn't over. The Xiphorians would regroup. They would retaliate. But Aria wouldn't stop fighting. Because humans never surrendered. And as long as she lived, she would make sure Rook's sacrifice meant something. The ruins of the Xiphorian command station stretched around Aria like the skeletal remains of a dead world. Fires flickered in the distance, casting long shadows against the shattered steel and broken glass. The final battle had led her here, to the heart of the enemy's dominion. And at the center of it all, waiting for her like a ghost in the dark, stood Lady Vayleth. Tall, poised, draped in an obsidian-black exosuit that shimmered with unnatural energy, the Xiphorian warlord exuded an aura of absolute control. Her silver-white hair flowed behind her, untouched by the chaos around them. The red glow of her eyes burned with something deeper than rage, a cold, quiet certainty. Aria stepped forward, her pulse blade humming to life in her grip. "It's over, Vayleth." The Xiphorian commander tilted her head slightly, studying Aria with something almost like amusement. "No, human. It has only begun." Then she moved. In an instant, Vayleth closed the distance between them, her energy blades slashing through the air. Aria barely had time to react. She raised her weapon just in time to block, the impact sending a shockwave through her arms. The strength behind the blow was inhuman. Vayleth twisted, her movements fluid, precise. Aria ducked, narrowly avoiding a slash aimed at her throat. She retaliated, dragging forward with a quick thrust, but Vayleth sidestepped effortlessly, her blade flickering toward Aria's ribs. Aria leaped back. Too slow. The Xiphorian's weapon sliced across her side, searing pain ripping through her body. Aria gritted her teeth, pushing through the agony. She couldn't afford hesitation. Not now. Vayleth smiled, an expression of cruel amusement. "You fight well, for a lesser species." Aria didn't respond. She lunged again, feinting left before twisting right. Her blade grazed Vayleth's armor. But before she could follow through, the warlord countered with terrifying speed. A sharp kick to Aria's chest sent her flying backward. She crashed into a crumbling pillar, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Dust and debris rained down around her as she struggled to her feet. She was fast, too fast. Aria's mind raced. She couldn't win this in a straight fight. She needed a new approach. Vayleth advanced slowly, her blade dripping with Aria's blood. "You humans never learn," she said, voice smooth, calculated. "You believe your defiance is strength. But in the end, it is only your downfall." Aria wiped the blood from her mouth and smirked. "Funny," she said. "I was about to say the same thing." Then she activated her cloaking device. Vayleth's eyes narrowed as Aria vanished. The warlord lashed out, her blade slicing through empty air. But Aria was already behind her. She deactivated the cloak for a split second, just long enough to land a precise strike to Vayleth's exposed side. The pulse blade sank in, and for the first time, Vayleth staggered. Aria pressed her advantage. Strike. Twist. Move. She darted around the warlord like a ghost, her attack swift and relentless. Another cut. Another wound. But then, Vayleth let out a guttural snarl and unleashed a shockwave of energy. The force sent Aria skidding backward, her body slamming into the ground. Pain burned through her limbs. Vayleth stood tall, her breathing heavier now. But instead of anger, she smiled. Impressive. Aria struggled to her feet. Her vision blurred for a moment, but she steadied herself. She was running out of time. She needed to end this. Vayleth raised her blade, and the air around her began to hum. Energy crackled across her armor. She was preparing her final attack. Aria gripped her pulse blade tighter. No fear, no hesitation. The Xiphorian warlord charge. Aria ran straight at her. Time seemed to slow. Valeth's energy blade sliced downward, aiming for a kill shot. Aria twisted at the last second, just barely dodging. And then she activated her final EMP charge. She slammed the device against Valeth's chest. Boom! Electricity rippled across the warlord's body. Her armor flickered, the power failing for a brief moment. That was all Aria needed. She drove her blade straight into Valeth's heart. A sharp gasp escaped the warlord's lips. Her red eyes widened, not in rage, but in something deeper. Shock. Disbelief. Aria twisted the blade, shoving it in deeper. That's for Rook. Valeth's strength faded. She staggered, her body trembling. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Then, slowly, she fell. The Xiphorian warlord, the terror of humanity, was dead. Aria stood over the body, chest rising and falling with deep, ragged breaths. It was over. She had won. But as she looked around at the burning battlefield, at the wreckage, the bodies, the destruction, it didn't feel like a victory. She had lost too much, but she had no time to grieve. The war wasn't over. Not yet. Aria turned toward the horizon, gripping her blade tighter. There were still more battles to fight, and she would never stop fighting. The battlefield was silent. Smoke curled into the darkened sky, rising from the shattered remains of the Xiphorian fleet. The massive warships, once symbols of dominance, now drifted as wreckage, lifeless and broken. Fires burned across the ruins of the command station where the final battle had been fought. What was left of the Xiphorian forces had either been annihilated or had flowed into the void, leaderless and defeated. Aria stood at the edge of a crumbling platform, gazing at the wreckage below. Her pulse blade was still clutched in her fingers, the metal stained with dried blood. Her body ached, her wounds barely sealed by emergency med patches, but she barely felt them. The war had been won, but victory had never felt so heavy. Behind her, the surviving human soldiers gathered. Their armor was scorched, their faces smeared with dust and blood. Some held each other up, injured but alive. Others stood alone, staring at the ruins with hollow eyes, their minds still processing what they had lost. Rook was gone. So were dozens of others, people who had fought beside her, people she had sworn to protect. They had given their lives for this victory. Aria exhaled slowly. She couldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. A soft beep in her earpiece pulled her from her thoughts. "Commander Aria," came a voice from the comms. "General Carter, leader of the human resistance. Is it done?" Aria's gaze drifted to the fallen body of Lady Valeth, the Xiphorian warlord who had sworn to enslave humanity. The once feared conqueror now lay motionless, her lifeless red eyes staring into nothing. Aria tightened her grip on her blade. "It's done." There was a pause on the other end. Then, a sigh of relief. "Good. We're preparing the message." Aria nodded. The message. Humanity had been a prey species in the eyes of the galaxy. The Xiphorians had invaded, expecting an easy victory. They had believed Earth would kneel. But Earth had fought back. And now, the entire galaxy needed to know what had happened here. The humans weren't just survivors. They were warriors. And they had a message for anyone who thought of challenging them next. Aria turned to one of the surviving engineers, nodding toward the Xiphorian broadcasting station, a massive alien transmission array that had once been used to send commands across the fleet. "Can you get it working?" she asked. The engineer wiped sweat from his forehead and nodded. "It'll take a few minutes, but yeah, do it." Aria stepped forward, looking at the others. "Spread the word." Everyone regrouped near the broadcast tower. The soldiers moved, gathering around as the engineers worked. Sparks flickered from damaged panels as they reactivated the station, tapping into the Xiphorian network. Within moments, the array powered up, humming as it linked to galactic communication channels. Every major civilization in the galaxy would hear what happened today. The engineer turned back to Arya. "We're live." Arya took a slow breath and stepped forward, standing before the broadcast terminal. A holographic display flickered to life, showing her reflection. She looked worn, tired, but her eyes burned with something deeper than exhaustion. Determination. She pressed the activation switch. A red warning symbol flashed, indicating that the signal was being transmitted across every known galactic frequency. Every alien race, every empire, every world that had ignored humanity before would hear this. Arya spoke. "This is Commander Arya of the United Human Resistance." Her voice was calm, unshaken. "The Xiphorian Empire is no more." She let the words sink in. Across the stars, rulers and warlords, kings and conquerors would pause, because that was impossible. The Xiphorians were supposed to be unstoppable. And yet here she was. "They came to our world," she continued. "They burned our cities. They slaughtered our people. They thought we were weak." Her eyes narrowed. They were wrong. Silence stretched in the comms. She could imagine leaders on distant planets leaning closer to their screens, listening. "Humanity is not prey. We are not slaves. And we are not afraid." Her fingers curled into fists. "If you come for us, we will fight." She stepped closer, voice unwavering. "And if you try to take what is ours," she glanced at the ruins around her, at the fallen Xiphorian warships burning in the distance, at Lady Valeth's lifeless body, "we will destroy you." The last words hung in the air, heavy and final. A message carved in fire and blood. A warning. A promise. She pressed a button, and the transmission cut. Silence fell over the command station. The soldiers around her stood tall, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Some even smiled, a rare thing in times like this. Arya let out a breath. The war was over, but the battle for humanity's future had just begun. She turned to General Carter's voice in her earpiece. "We just made history." Arya gazed at the stars, where distant civilizations would now be watching. Let's hope they were listening.